Welcome to the October 19th NMRA-PCR Coast Division Saturday meetup. This is going to be a fairly informal meetup today. We don't have any formal. David Gibbons is going to do a little clinic about cars through the years. Our major focus is just kind of having a conversation. So, the one thing I did want to talk about is, we do need future clinics and volunteers. Specifically, really do need some volunteers. So if anyone, if you're a PCR member and you're interested in doing volunteering, please give me a call or maybe expect a call from me. The one thing I want to make sure I was aware of, our next upcoming event is December 8th, and that is at the Senior Center in Alameda. Will be an auction. We'll have an auction. We'll have a clinic to go with that, and it'll be kind of a fun day. So with that, I'm just going to open it up for kind of sharing, etc., and then we'll go ahead and if David wants, he can go ahead and go through his clinic about cars. So welcome everyone. And I know Bob was showing us some exciting stuff that he's modeling. So I don't know if we want to continue there or anything else anyone would like to talk about.
I have a question for Bob. How are you going to, the bottom of that, is that foam on the bottom or is that a piece of shelving?
It's a piece of, so the construction of the module is as a 3/4 inch Home Depot 12-inch by 6-foot shelf.
Okay.
One of the things I decided, I'd done some pretty complicated bench work to try to make things light. It's like the side panel was a piece of carpentry all in itself because it was a top and bottom frame rail and it was separated with blocks, and making sure that that was absolutely straight and square in and of itself is a carpentry project. And if that isn't square, the rest of the module isn't square. So I just decided to use the 12-inch by 72-inch shelf. It was $18. And I bought poplar 1x4 pieces 2 feet long at Home Depot for $5 and used 2 of those to make the collars at the ends, and the pieces on the side that I use to attach the fascia. On the back side, I'm attach a 1/4 inch piece of plywood that runs the length at 6 inches tall, and it basically triangulates it enough so it doesn't sag.
Right.
Because when I bought the shelf says support in 5 places if you put any weight on it. I supported it by the ends and it drooped about 1/2 inch.
Support. So that must be a piece of particle board.
Yeah.
Shelf.
Yeah, it's okay. Just it's a piece of it. It's probably a piece of MDF, and then it's got like a cover on it, something nice on it on the outside.
It drills great. I don't use wood screws into it. I use bolts with nuts and hold it in compression.
Right.
MDF is not that bad, and it will support a span easily of 24 inches. You probably don't want to run it over 6 feet unsupported because it will sag over time.
Right. So I have a brace. So I brace. And then I have two layers of pink foam. Those are glued down with foam glue, the standard Project for Nails.
Yep.
Glue. Then I glued what I do different is I glued the foam to the road bed I glued Woodland Scenics road bed to the pink foam with epoxy. I use epoxy for a lot. It's my favorite. Adhesive. The thing that's interesting about epoxy and the Woodland Scenic is that the epoxy semi-interlocks with the Woodland Scenic without really bonding to it, and you can separate it with effort if you want to. So I glued I put in the switches and got all the switches basically laid in place, and then I laid the track in between them, and so it's basically five passing siding and three spurs.
Can this interface with the other CCC modules, or is it
Absolutely
always free?
So the bolt hole at the end of this matches exactly the bolt hole in CCC, and if I go to a CCC group meet and somebody's concerned about things rotating, I have an adapter plate which has two holes for my 12-inch module and a hole in between and holes for the CCC modules, so I could bolt this on either side of the CCC.
Right.
So it could basically, I don't know, sort of not. Yeah, so this could interface with CCC, but I got work to do before that, and also need to make sure that my stuff works electrically as well too.
Right. Now, if it's CCC, you've got to carry DCC power through.
Yeah.
You've got to pass DCC power through. And does CCC carry 110 volts under all the modules, or is that separate?
No.
No. Okay.
No, just the DCC and the Ethernet for the cab.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, we actually have had a discussion about doing 12 volts and about, buying a 12-volt supply and putting it into the center power station and running 12 volts, as a separate feed through the modules. So you got a separate set of connectors for 12 volts to feed 12 volts to. Right now, what we end up doing is we end up putting down a 110-volt power cord, one of those ones that has a plug, the kind of like the Christmas ones you get, they got a plug every 6 feet or something.
Yeah.
We put those under the layout, and then all of the power for 12 volts on modules is done with basically with wall warts.
Right.
And, to some extent, you could reduce the setup hassle of having to find the wall wart, plug it in, and that if you just plugged everything together. But it kind of requires everybody to put the same thing on their modules. You have to put an electrical standard, just like you have for DCC, where you've got the right kind of connector on either end so they match, the right pin out defined. You got to do the same thing for 12 volts. Yeah. And we've talked about that. If I was going to do a modular standard again, I would do that. Mm-hmm. I think carrying 12 volts around makes a lot of sense. And, you really shouldn't have much voltage drop over the length of a typical modular layout, especially with Molex connectors. They don't have a lot of loss.
Right.
Yeah. You can deal with loss with wire gauge.
Yeah. Well, and with 12 volts, even if you have a half a volt of loss, it really is irrelevant. And they all start at 13.5 volts anyway. So cool.
Here's Mr. Osorio.
So did I show you guys? So I'm building a module also. I don't know if I showed you pictures of this. I will share a picture or two. So this is actually, let me do this. Before I do that, let me show you where it's going to go, because that's actually an important kind of thing to understand. Hang on. Finding things these days has gotten much more challenging. My everything seems to be filled up with stuff on my computer.
It does tend to collect.
Yeah, an awful lot of junk, it seems like, in my world.
Mr. Osorio, why isn't that a Southern Pacific caboose instead of Norfolk Southern?
Well, because I wanted to change the pace. It's always Western Railroad, so I'm pick an Eastern one.
What's that? 5555553. It's extended. That's an extended vision, which is a common type from back in the day, isn't it?
Yep.
And that one has, am I correct? It looks like it has roof walks. It does have roof walks on it.
Looks like it.
Yeah. I have an O-scale caboose as part of my Christmas train, and then when I started to look at it, and then got a Santa Fe extended vision, and then you start to look at the prototype and the caboose that I got, and you realize that the caboose they sell you is a hopeless mishmash of, it says C8 on the side, but then you go and look up C8 cabooses for the ATSF, and the caboose, the model I have, has roof walks and this and that and the other, but then you look at the real C8s, nope.
No.
They just don't get very they're so very picky on those actual historical details.
Yeah.
You know,
Gee.
just they get one, they make one model and then paint it and number it and stuff for a whole bunch of prototypes, and it might not be right for any of them.
Yeah.
But well, it's a caboose. What do you want?
Mass produced, that's all.
Yeah, yeah. Any luck, Phil?
Yeah, yeah. Let me go ahead and do this here. This
Take it away.
should be interesting. So let's see if we can do something here. So hang on. Let me put up the picture I wanted to put up first, and then second. Hang on. I was looking at something else also, but
Could you set up
okay.
Spotlight for speaker, Phil?
Yeah, I can. I have to spotlight me. You guys can just spotlight it and it'll be there, but I can spotlight me. So anyway, let me kind of just, so this is what I'm doing in my train room. So the three green modules here are, and this is that you hear Mia there in the background. That's her, I want attention kind of moan. So what I'm doing right now is, Moss Landing, this module is built, this module is built, this module is built. What I'm doing right now is building this module first and this module here, which will tie. So these are built to the standards of the other modules, but they're not built to be taken anywhere. So this one I call Pajaro because it's kind of it's by Moss Landing going north. And so if you kind of look at this, it's basically you come into it, you come around, there's a split. I've done this, so I've got a nice crossing siding here. And then there's some switching here and some switching back here. There's a beat loader and some buildings back here, and then a stockyard here. And by the way, interesting to look at where this is. When I show you the module, you'll actually see it came out a little different when I did it. So basically this is what it looks like. So this is a little over 8 feet. It's 98.5 inches this way, and it's 4 feet this way. You'll notice that I did a cut here, and I decided I wanted to bring the rail out a little bit further. So I actually added a little piece in here. And one of the things you also notice here is this is actually right here is that yard for the stockyard. And I decided to put it here instead of over here because it gave me more room to make things more reachable. So I'll show you how I did the layout on here because it's kind of interesting how it was put together. So, some different pictures of the module. The top is 1/2 inch plywood. It's pretty simple, 1/2 inch plywood. Because I had a fairly good span, I just used 1x6 because it was cheap and easy. So basically the framing underneath, it's going to bolt to the wall here and here. And then I'm going to have legs on this end here and here, and legs here and here. So it'll be supported. These boards actually run all the way through, and they're notched here. I'll show you that in a second. They're notched so that these are continuous and these are continuous. And you can see here the back side of the notch actually broke out on that one. But it's enough support. It's enough support to make sure that it's pretty well supported. And then I cut down. This area is going to be a water scene here in the front. There's a little harbor scene. So this is cut down with separate blocks of wood to support that. And one of the things you see on the end here, because I bought a 4x8 sheet of plywood, which obviously only 96 inches long. This, like I said, is 98.5. The easy way to do that on this kind of a thing is you can kind of see it best in this drawing here. I cut an angle, and then you slide the wood over. When you slide the wood along the angle, it makes it longer. So this was cut across. Now I screwed up. I should have cut this angle before I cut this part out. And because I did that, what I ended up having to do is I had to take this piece of wood and cut it in half. So there's another cut there. That was a mistake. I got too anxious. I got too energetic with the other cuts.
That was a learning opportunity, Phil, not a mistake.
No. But basically all you do there is this is just masonite.
Yeah.
I just took some blocks of scrap masonite, threw a bunch of wood glue on them, and then, glued them in with some 1/2 inch, air brads, with my air nailer. And then these are the corners. So you can see, each board's been notched halfway through. So when they fit in, and I haven't done this yet. I'm putting corner blocks in these, and that'll corner block them.
I'm interested,
Uh,
Phil, in that I see you have what look like 3/4 by 3/4 square tucked in at the bottom where
Yeah,
the
these are all
plywood.
one. These are all 1 by blocks.
Hmm,
And what you do is you basically, I just cut a 1 by block. I take, it's the same wood as this. It's the same
right.
1 by. You take
Hmm.
the 1 by, you rip it into 1 by strips, and then you cut those to length. And I just go on the drill press and I just drill like two holes in each one, and
Hmm.
then just screw them onto the wood. And then when you screw the wood down, you screw those there. And then when you get it all done, you turn it over. And I don't know if you can see it, if you can see it here, but there are screws everywhere on the top here.
Hmm.
So the screws go into the boards also, but the blocks are there just to make it more solid.
Right.
Um,
Oh, okay. Got it.
and so anyway, so that's one half of what I'm doing. So this right now. Actually, I was going to show you was what I did was to do the layout is I took, these are the templates from Fast Tracks.
Hmm.
And what I did was I took those and cut them out. And actually, I moved them over into PowerPoint. And then on the PowerPoint drawings, I put on these red lines. So you get center lines on all the tracks on the templates.
Right.
And then you can just print the templates out and you can just tape them together to create the turnout paths. So,
What's your
you
frog
get,
number?
these are all fives. I
Fives.
have the
Okay.
number 5 kit from Fast Tracks. And this was when I was cutting out but you can see here, this is kind of that one area. So you can see, it starts up here and you come in and there's a turnout and you see this is one piece. And then what I've done is I've added a second turnout right here.
Hmm.
And then there's a reversing turnout back over here. And once you get these done, then you can use a red, I've got one of those red carpenter's pencils, when you pull the tape off and it's like a crayon on the end.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And you basically can mark those red lines and then come back, pull the paper up, use the straight edge, put the red lines in. Now you've got red lines. Because if you look at doing the next step with this, you go back here to this. The next step with this is I bought Homabed. I don't know if you know what Homabed is. It's a guy who makes this. It's basically Homasote cut to a railroad roadbed profile like cork. And the way it works is you get two pieces, and you either buy straight pieces or you buy pieces that are cut so they can be curved. So essentially, the nice thing about this is you can just take one of those pieces and lay it right along one side of this line, and then when that dries, come back and put the other piece on the other side, and you get all the shapes. And these were all done basically by starting with these lines, and then I essentially come out. I've got a stick that's got a bunch of holes drilled, and I probably should show that at some point. And what you do is you find the end point here where you come in, and you come off at a square, and then you come back a little bit. And so what ends up happening is that this line here is actually a radius, and I did a 24-inch minimum. Most of these, I think this is a 26 or a 28 here. And
Mm.
then it's designed so it's got easements on both ends when you come on.
Now
And
this comes up against a CCC module, right?
right, there's a regular module here and a regular module over here. So
Now,
like this
what
is the regular module here, that's 6 inches in from the sides.
on the CCC, how do you join the track on adjacent modules?
So the track is always held back an inch from the edge of the module, and that's to
Okay,
protect that's mainly to protect the track
right.
when it's in transport. And what we do is we bolt them together. They have bolts to hold them together, and you
Hmm.
get them lined up, and then you just put a piece of rail in with a isolating rail joiner, insulating on one side and non-insulating on the other side,
Huh. Okay,
and those just go across.
got it.
So anyway, so that was my first thing I was doing. And actually, so let me share that one more time here. So one of the things is if you look at this, you notice that, so I'm putting all these turnouts are all electric, because when you're here, you can reach in here to the loader and all of this to do any uncoupling operations. You can do uncoupling here, but these turnouts are not very reachable. So I decided not to do ground throws on them. And once I decided not to do ground throws on that, and these are already electric, and I felt like this one here, especially at the far end of the runaround, you would want that one to be electric. So if you were standing over here doing a runaround move, you wouldn't have to walk over here to throw the turnout. So what that meant was, when I thought about it, I needed two control panels, one here and one here. Now, what I'm doing is under here, I'm actually building an equipment cabinet. It'll be 18 inches by 40 inches, and it'll have all my equipment in it. And so let me show you what my
Wait, when you say equipment, do you mean rolling stock, or do you
no
mean
Electrical.
infrastructure, electrical. So
okay.
Oh, that was the name. Mia must have hit that. That was
Power, DCC power amp.
Yep.
That
okay.
So
Right.
what I'm doing is I'm designing. This is half of a control panel. Oh, I got to turn off my background.
okay.
That
None
would
of
help.
this stuff works with a background on. So this is a half of a control panel. This is the other half. I started with building them this way. So
Mhm.
that's a half a control panel. This is 3D printed. That's a
Wow.
3D printed control panel. So it's basically just one 3D print. And what's black there, and this is just done with a black permanent ink marker. It's raised 1.5 millimeters, all the text and stuff there. I was looking at this and I decided it's going to be dark and it's hard to see. So what I've done is I've redesigned it. And this is the other half of the panel. So these will go together like that. This one actually is designed so it's going to be inset, and it's designed so on the top there, you notice there's places to put LEDs, so this becomes illuminated in here. And so that's what so you'll have what you're going to have in each of these two locations. And then the other thing I've done is I've designed this, and this is one of two. So a lot of times you have to print two of things because they're too small. This switch doesn't fit right yet, but this is there to be a control panel for lighting.
Okay.
So basically, I'm going to have 4 of these because I have 4 light systems. So I have two 2.7K up there. I'm at the switch. I have two 2.7K light systems and a 6K and a blue. And so for each one, there's an on-off switch, which is one of these little flat on-off switches. And then this is a 12-volt dimmer to dim it. So basically what I'll have is on the panel that's there, on the where I'm building the panel, is you'll have this and this side by side. Of course, each one's about, that wide. And then there's a third one I'm doing, which will have all the DCC controls in it. So what it'll have integrated into the 3D print, the face plate for the, I'm just going to use a power cab because I have one and they're cheap. And then I'll put a ramp meter in. And so I'll have those on the bottom, and then I'll have a little window open into an area. And in there, I'll have the circuit breakers, and I'm going to have 4 switches to run the turnouts. And I'm probably going to put I'll put those behind glass and a little illuminated. If you ever look at the stuff that Tom Farrell did, he did this really cool thing for his electronics where he put a piece of plexiglass in like this and created this little area where it's all components, and it's illuminated with green light. It looks really cool.
Now, so the reason that panel you printed that's for turnout control, it's a single push button because they're driving switches.
Yeah, I'm using switches. I decided, and I'm using switches for actually a very simple reason. When we were in, hang on, let me take my spotlight off so everybody can see everybody else. When I was in Pittsburgh, we went to this really great place called the DARE Club, DARE Club, and it was actually started by a guy who was the local police department DARE officer. And they actually started a club that is very, very youth focused. They have 25 young members, and they come in and they run the trains and they do stuff, and they're all over the place. And I actually have got a video. If you guys are interested, I'll show you the video of these kids. They're pretty precocious little kids running trains. And when we were there, they support themselves completely through donations. They have no dues or anything. And we were there. They had a bunch of tortoises somebody had donated, and Tom wanted the tortoises. So he was buying the tortoises, and a bunch of the tortoises had switchets connected to them.
Oh,
And so I said, "Hey, you guys want those?" No, no. And so I ended up getting 4 switchets for free. So, so I only
good
have
deal.
I have to buy the $10 worth of relays for it to run them, as we talked about. And do the same thing we did doing in Pleasanton. Don't try to use the output of the switchet. Use the output of the switchet to run a relay, and use that to run the 12 volts for the turnouts.
Yeah.
The LED, because again, I'm gonna have the same problem here that we were talking about earlier, because
Yeah.
I'm gonna have 2 sets of LEDs and the turnout, and by the time you add that up, you're up to about 65, 60, somewhere in there, 40 to 60 milliamps, and
Yeah.
and the switches just won't drive that much current.
Side note for you, Phil, I'm finding out modern LEDs, they will typically run quite well on 5
No,
milliamps
no.
these days.
Oh, you already made coffee. I'll get it.
I think Larry was having a separate conversation.
Yeah,
I
I
hope
think
so.
he's talking
I
to
hope he
his
wasn't
better half.
commenting on Lele. I
Yeah,
muted him because
sorry.
I didn't think you were commenting on. It didn't sound like a comment on LEDs. It's okay. Happens all the time. By the way, that's why I mute people. My favorite story, we're being recorded, so I shouldn't say this, but very early on New Tracks, we had like 30 people on one of these things, and all of a sudden you hear this woman's voice go, "Harry, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm watching this video. It's boring as hell." And you just want to be really careful, because it's kind of interesting. You almost got to get in the mode of, when you're not talking, mute yourself, because you just don't know what's going to happen in the background. And if you're in a big meeting, a lot of people are going to hear it. So
yeah.
Anyway, so that's been my project. Today I'm building turnouts. I got to build 8 turnouts, and it's not one of my favorite things. I like doing things where you're thinking and creating stuff. Building 8 turnouts, which is kind of grunt work, is to me a lot less interesting.
It's very prototypical.
That's
you just
true.
sit there and you cut the steel and make things go together.
And as my father said, my father became a physics professor after being a carpenter. After World War II, he went back to school, and his comment about carpentry always was that it's 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration.
Yep.
And I think that's the way railroading is. There's not a lot of inspiration in railroading. There's an awful lot of perspiration.
Although doing the perspiration without first thinking about what the heck you're going to do can waste a lot of time and money.
Right. Well, it's not like the alternatives are labor free. It probably takes me a half hour to prep a Pico switch to have it be ready, because there's a bunch of stuff I do with I gap some rails, I fill the gap with styrene, I make sure I wire to the points with a wire, into the exposure rails with a wire. And so by the time I'm all done with that, I'm probably in for a half hour of prep work. I mean, that was last Saturday, right?
Yep.
And so one of the reasons why there are 5 switches on this module is I had 5 Pico switches left, and I wanted to use up the rest of my Pico switches, because the next module I want to borrow Phil's fast track jig, because I like that for the amount of effort that it takes. I think that fast track is probably within 50% of the effort of what it takes to actually put down a Pico switch. And I've hand laid track before. I like the idea of the fast track kind of concept to try to make it a little more organized and consistent.
Yep. I run fast track also. My switching layout is all stuff I built. It's interesting because there's so many aspects of this hobby, and different guys will find different aspects to be boring and laborious and difficult, where another person will go, "Man, I spent 3 hours doing that and I was relaxed and happy and had a great time." And it's just what floats your boat. And it's finding those things, making a railroad where the things you love to do are a bigger part of it, and the things you don't love to do are minimized to as much as will keep the railroad running. Okay, so if we somebody else wants to talk, but otherwise I've got some cars here I want to talk about.
Okay, if you guys want, I'll show you one video real quick. I thought this was a cool video. So if you haven't seen this, Let
Take
me
it
go.
away,
Let
Maestro.
me go. Let me go find my place here. Here we go. So I don't know if you guys have seen this. So these are the White Pass and Yukon Alcos. That have been repainted in Durango and Silverton colors. And Rich is on here. Remember, we saw those last year when they were at the at the shops. But yeah, so they're starting to run these on as a. I always thought those were cool looking locomotives for narrow gauge.
I like the speed lettering.
Anyway, I found that video. I thought those was kind of a cool video.
That's 3-foot gauge, is that right?
That's 3-foot gauge, and they were Alcos. I think they were actually built in Canada. At
Right.
Alco in Canada, but they were built for the White Pass and Yukon, because they ran late enough that they were well past steam. And they were small standard gauge engines redone for narrow gauge. And then apparently, because the White Pass and Yukon is now fundamentally a tourist railroad that runs a bunch of steam engines up the canyon, they didn't need the Alcos anymore, so they sold them to Durango and Silverton, and they're going to use them there. I always thought,
like the sound of those Alcos. That's distinctive.
yeah, I always thought those were cool. There were, there was, hang on, let me, when we were at the narrow gauge convention, I'll show you this. This was, share another thing. This was a layout. The guy who owns this is the guy who, so you guys are seeing a living room there, right? With a layout in it. And, this is the guy who runs the owner of Durango and Silverton owns with Disney, has the Disney license to administer the Polar Express trains that run at Christmas. So if you're a tourist railroad and you want to run a Polar Express train and label it as a Polar Express train, you have to license that from the Durango and Silverton company under the license from Disney for it. You can't just go out and say we're doing a Polar Express. They will come after you. So this is the guy that administers and runs that program. So he lives in a condo or townhouse, I guess, there in Durango. And so this is his living room we're sitting in. And this is a model in HON3 of the White Pass and Yukon. And you see down here at the end, now he did say this was removable, and it extends out here over the kitchen eating counter. And so, one thing that's very interesting, what thing can you say with absolute surety about him?
He's a bachelor.
Exactly. You got it. 100%. Never would survive the spousal approval cycle. But what's interesting is if you look over
or he's divorced.
Yeah, look over on the left side under the layout at the control system. And I show you for it. So this was some picture. These are kind of the classic box cabs that they had on the White Pass and Yukon. It's a very nicely done layout, very well done. And it's actually on the time frame there. I think in the early '60s is when he's doing.
Nice.
One of the things that was very interesting was that I didn't realize this. The White Pass and Yukon was apparently one of the real early railroads to push containerized transport, because they were basically taking things off of ships, putting them on the railroad, carrying them up the railroad, taking them off and putting them on something else to go where they went. And so the idea of not having to handle stuff and just handling containers was for them a great benefit. So they actually started doing containers very early. But I thought this was a great picture. This is the underside of the layout. And he actually is using all of these relays. They're old railroad relays he found to actually run the turnout points and that kind of thing, which I thought was pretty cool. That was another picture of that, of one of those racks of stuff there.
Operating cards, NCE cab brackets. Yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah. No, it's very much a standard operating layout, but and this is the view from the other end, so you can see the end of this is the end of the living room there, and kind of the railroad runs all the way along the way. So those were my Durango and Silver. Those when we were in Durango last year, and I got to see that layout after going to the shops. And actually, when we were in the shops last year, we actually got to see that these were actually, hang on. So these were actually taken last year at the convention in September. These were actually when the one was done and the other one was actually in the shops being painted. Those two Alcos. They're pretty cool looking engines with those cooler stacks on the top of them.
Phil, a question on that layout at Durango, that gentleman's layout.
There,
Were
I'm
the
sorry, there it is.
railroad hardware, the big high reliability relays, could you hear them go throw clunk clunk or anything, or were they quiet?
There was enough noise with people in there. I did not notice.
Okay, not
I have to say,
all right.
and I don't know that anybody was throwing a lot of turnouts either. It was a lot of just kind of looking at the layout. Really wasn't running.
Got it.
It really wasn't operating. It was really just looking at it. So
Okay.
I bet you they go clunk clunk.
I'm sure they must.
Yeah.
They don't make that click sound that Chinese wuss click sound that other relays make.
Yeah.
Those ones that I just bought make.
Before we get to David's presentation, I just wanted to comment that I really found the Salinas part of your layout design interesting, Phil, because the diagonal sort of layout of that reminds me of the North Pacific Coast Railroad in Sausalito, the yard setup, and that's something that I want to do. So as you get to buildings, your Salinas yard and setup, I'll be interested in hearing how you manage that.
Yeah, that's hopefully I'll get to that next year. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Time frames are challenging these days, it seems like.
Yeah. Oh, and Mr. Connery has joined us. Hello, David. Anyway, I'm going to talk about an evolution in my thought and practice in dealing with 89-foot flats. And this is not oriented on, how shall I put it, prototypical fidelity and detail accuracy, but rather running reliability. So I'm going to just start showing them. Let's see, can we spotlight my iPad mini, Phil?
We can.
All right. So the 89-foot cars that Athearn offers are outfitted with, let's see here. Let me get this so I can see that. They're offered by Athearn with an arrangement where, to get them around tight radiuses, there's a big swing arm. Okay, come on. And the swing arm pivots off of the kingpin, and the swing arm comes out, and it contains a coupler pocket. And at first, I started using them and found that they were too floppy and had difficulty controlling the height of the coupler. And coupler height that varies is a formula for, of course, for uncoupling. So you can just barely see a little shiny piece of spring wire there. Come on. That shiny piece of spring wire was a piece of piano wire that held the swing arm centered and pressed the swing arm. It pressed down on the swing arm to hold the coupler so it wouldn't hang low. And after a while, I realized that since the layout I was running on was a modular layout with 36-inch radius, I didn't need those swing arms. And so one of the things I did is I abandoned the swing arm idea and body mounted the coupler, which is you see here. You can see the small blocks on either side. And those were back when there was a swing arm and I was trying to limit the amount of swing. But this was the thing I did with this very early generation car, was gave up on the swing arm and went to body mounting. Another sign that this was an early generation car for me was early on our club drilled through the wheels and ran a resistor, a regular 1/8 watch resistor, to get a detected pickup on the car. And the other thing about the car was the next generation for detection was to go to the, come on, chip resistor, which you will see right there. So that was another step forward on the car. You'll notice though that this car is just the good old black plastic, injection molded black plastic styrene, and that was what the bottom of the car was. Now, the other thing is this car's underframe was stock. You can actually see a bit of shiny steel underneath the brake cylinder here, which is it had the steel plate sandwiched between the deck and the bottom of the car, and that was all you had for weight. So this car had weight in the containers, and the containers are permanently mounted. So this was a first generation shot at making a 89-foot car that the couplers behaved properly on a broad radius 36-inch curve, and that stayed in the rail because it was weighted up to the NMRA recommended practice, and coupler height was controlled pretty well because the coupler is body mounted. The one other thing though I did with this car that is not at all visible is that the weight was not put in there dry. That is, with nothing, you just put it in. The Athearn is you just drop the weight in, then put the underbody in, and a few screws hold it in place. That's it. And what I found is on long cars, if you do that, this underframe can be flexible. And so I put the weight into the deck with Walther's goo and bonded it permanently. And then I put the bottom of the car onto the steel frame with goo and bonded it permanently. And you guys probably are aware of the danger of doing that. If you don't let enough solvent evaporate out of the glue, then the solvent attacks the styrene and you end up with a twisted up mess as the styrene just gets chewed up by the adhesive. But still, this car, the deck, the weight, and the bottom deck, the bottom floor here are bonded together in a solid unit. And there's a specific reason for that, because with it bonded, this is rigid. It's not bendy. So again, your coupler height is controlled. So that was car number one. But the thing is, you lack flexibility if you permanently mount your weight on containers or trailers on the car. So I wanted this car to be empty so I could put things on it or take things off, but it still makes the weight recommendation. But I wasn't very subtle. Can you see the chunk of lead painted black, the two chunks of lead there? And over here, this car running empty does meet the NMRA recommended practice for weight. It still has the bonded floor where the three pieces of the sandwich are bonded together. So again, that is hard to move. And so it controls the height of the coupler for reliability. This one was a car where it again did have the swing arm originally before I gave up on them, and just tore off the swing arm and body mounted the coupler. So that was another step in the process or my evolution of working on these cars. The next one, some more changes. Again, no swing arm here, but instead you can take, so happens that K&S Metals offers a rectangular brass tube that is just the right size, that if you take a KD number 5 coupler pocket and thin the sides just a little bit, you can slip it inside of the K&S Metals brass rectangular piece. And that piece is glued down and actually extends all the way to back here. So it actually also supports the truck. And the thing is, the coupler height was a little bit low doing it this way. So you can just barely see on either side of the mounting. Where's my pencil? Come here. On either side of the mounting screw, I'm pointing at a KD coupler box top, which has a projection that the screw runs through. And that lifted the car up a little bit. And then I have a KD red washer that you can just see here. So that was done to get the car up to the right height when using this brass tubing. The brass tubing also, of course, helps really stiffen this car so that, again, the coupler height can be depended upon. Now, in the ugly category is how I weighted this car. I had scrap pieces of lead, and I just cut the chunks down, glued them in, and painted it. And that is perhaps the ugliest weighting means that I used in this group of cars. It's just really ugly. A good coat of brown paint. And this is the first car where I painted the underbody to a, decently muddy look. But still, if you looked at this car from the side, you can sort of see the lumpy weights in there. So that's not really that good. This car has a permanently mounted trailer, but there's no weight in it. So the center of gravity of the car is still very low. All right, so being dissatisfied with the look of the lumpy weights, again, permanently mounted trailer, but to keep the weight low, my next step was to hide the weight, the added weight. And it's not very noticeable, but you can sort of see on the end of this car that the bottom of the car sits a little bit higher than the deck. And that is because in this particular car, I took the steel weight, I laid it down on a sheet of 1/16 inch thick lead sheet, and I cut a new weight. A sheet of lead runs 16th inch 16th inch thick. Say that fast 3 times. And threw the steel weight away, bonded the lead sheet to the deck with goo, carefully making sure that it had most of the solvent out when I actually attached it. And then I glued this bottom plate to the lead sheet. And on this car, again, I used some K&S metal, in this case, C-channel, to be the support for the truck. You can see it there. Support the truck and come up to the back of the coupler to stiffen that end, although, whether it really needs it. And then this one, again, I got busy and used some dark brown and black mix of cheap acrylic craft paint and got the underbody painted. So in this model, the deck sits a few inches higher than the prototype because of the extra thickness of that sheet lead under the car. So that is the thing that I did there. Now this has one thing that I don't like and I've tried to stop doing here, which is at first, the early cars, I literally used a liquid plastic cement and glued the coupler pocket to the car. And it has worked, but if they get knocked off, going to be a pain to replace them. Or if they get damaged, a pain to replace. This is the typical, put a dab of Walther's glue, put down the coupler pocket, and then just stick a big screw through it, which isn't very elegant. So the last car in this presentation is this thing. All right, I'm working on modeling the late 1980s. The Southern Pacific was running their Golden Pig service. But again, these are not weighted. I have painted the bottom though, so they aren't glaring white plastic. If you get a look, if you happen to see them up on a bridge, they don't look ridiculous underneath, but they're not weighted. Again, the car is weighted. And once again, deck, sheet lead, 16th inch. And on this car, I actually gave up on the bottom sheet of material. That is, on this car, you can see they have a piece, they have molded styrene representing the bottom of the car with the ribs and stuff. And I said, heck with that. Here you're looking at the sheet lead just by itself. It loses some underbody detail, therefore. I am not filled with shame. I am perfectly happy to have the car just paint it so that it, if you look at it at a low angle, it, there's stuff, but it doesn't have that fine detail. And again, the sheet lead is bonded to the deck. And to make that big screw look a little, reduce that big screw look, come on, where's the camera? There. It's all mirror image reverse, so every time I try to move it into the field of view, it gets more and more confusing. A couple of 0080 screws into the side, which you no longer have the problem with the coupler pocket wanting to pivot around a central screw, and a dab of paint over the brass screws there in the deck so that it isn't so obvious that the screws are there. So I didn't fill in this gap right here with C-channel to represent the center beam of the car coming out there. That's something I could do at any time. But so this has been this whole progression of ways I think about how I want to do my 85 or 89 foot flat cars based on the Athearn blue box type cars. I'm a cheapskate and I refuse to pay $30, $40, $50, $60 for a single car these days, partly because I really don't care about super duper, super pooper scooper detailing on my rolling stock. they're just so easy to break, and I'm about operations and reliability. So these cars are not super detailed, but I know they're going to be reliable runners, which is what was most important to me. You know, a little bit of chalk weathering is fun and easy, and it doesn't break. So that's been my my progression through dealing with these long flat cars. And any comments or thoughts, let me know.
Cool. It's very interesting. I mean, you know, it applies in some different areas. I mean, in the narrow gauge place, the only place it really applies to passenger cars. But obviously, if you're doing, you know, 80s, 90s modern railroading, 90-foot flat cars are going to be pretty something you have to deal with. So that's good. Very cool.
Yeah, they're because of the length and the weight and trying to keep them on the rails and keep them coupled up reliably. I
Yep.
just ended up doing this kind of work. Luckily, you can buy sheet lead today still through Amazon in 32nd and 16th inch thicknesses. I've got several boxes here full of sheet lead for future 89-foot cars that I want to build.
Yeah. Well, I'll have no cars longer than 40 feet, probably, but they still need to be weighted. And I have wooden, I have some wood kits that I'm putting together that are absolutely going to be too light.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now the thing is, Bob, is there's this ongoing discussion about, oh, the NMRA standards are too heavy, and on my railroad, I weigh my cars 3 times as heavy as that, or I weigh my car half as heavy as that, or I don't care. But it depends on what you're running and what you're running it on. And I think the most important point is a word I think that gets forgotten in the NMRA standards: interchange. If you are doing interchange, you're in a club and your car can be mixed in with all the other cars in the club. Having them conform to the recommended practices and standards, I think, makes a huge difference and is very important. If it's just Bob, if it's just you switching there at home and that's all you ever do, you can pretty much do whatever you want so long as they stay in the rails.
Coupler heights are unforgiving even at home.
Yeah, it's part of me on my RIP track project to work on helping people understand how to make reliable equipment. But I thought I would just share this with you guys. I enjoy this kind of work, sitting there and totally shredding a car and totally mangling it from what the manufacturer intended, but getting something that I can just depend on. It just is not going to go on the ground.
Well, it also works for cars that you've had long before the standards even came into effect.
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of blue box cars.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, though, the blue box cars I generally find them very amenable to doing the work to get them to where they'll be compliant and be reliable. But I just enjoy it. I'll sit there and I go, we've got let's see, where's it? December is the big train show in Pleasanton, Phil.
Yep.
And I will be going around and I will walk right by those dealers that have all the $30, $40, $50 new freight cars. And I will look in the scrounge boxes and go, is there any Southern Pacific in here that doesn't have roof walks? And, and I'll pick up a few of those and take them home and absolutely shred them, tear them down completely, and then build them back up. And for me, that is a happy afternoon of modeling. But, I'm a cheap bastard. What can I say?
Hey, if it works.
It works. It works. And
it
for me,
it gives you joy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very satisfying to have these cars. Although those 2 first cars there, I need to get my brown muddy paint on them and get these black underframes to look properly grungy and muddy and dirty and like that. So who else has a modeling thing to share?
Nope, I
Well,
don't.
nothing for you, Larry, huh?
No, nothing yet.
All quiet.
Yeah, too much kitchen remodeling and not enough
Oh
room.
dear. Well, I've had a lot of other stuff going on, so I've been sort of slow on my own stuff. My main priority is getting back over to Pleasanton, where we're getting ready for shows. But I'm trying to work on a long-term project with some of the other club members to do a survey of the main line track on that railroad to identify where we have wear issues and stuff where we need to do repairs and upgrades of frogs and things like that. And then I can occasionally get to either helping or impeding Phil on some of his electrical work on the layout.
At least you're not like my Golden State Mile Railroad HO scale club, because we only have one guy who does the electrical, and if he gets hit by the bus, we're in deep doo-doo.
Yes, yeah, that is very dangerous, especially in our railroads these days that depend on some fairly fancy and complex systems. DCC can help with that, but as Phil can tell you, even just doing DCC can get to be pretty damn hairy.
Yeah.
Right, but it's probably not just DCC. It's probably DCC on top of legacy something, so it makes it more complicated.
Well, currently one gentleman who's part of the team there on the O scale in Pleasanton is engaged on the simple project of pulling out what has to be miles of wire that's coming out from underneath the layout, which is the old DC stuff. It's just this impossible 40-year-old skein of undocumented, uncolor coded, sometimes uninsulated. And so that's getting simpler as that stuff gets torn out. And some problems are coming up because, oops, tore out one wire too many, but it's simpler, so it's going to be easier to fix and upgrade. So that's an ongoing.
Well, it's a combination of two problems, right? The first problem is nothing was documented. And then the second problem is whenever anybody revised anything, they just abandoned in place whatever they stopped using. And I mean, so you go under there and there's a place where there must be 500 wires going through, and 70 or 80% of them aren't being used.
Yeah.
And I think from a club perspective, when you start out, establishing really strong electrical standards is really important.
Yes.
Mhm.
Oddly enough, Phil, if you may recall, if you look at the control panel for the freight yard, somebody whoever did that documented it. But it's the only part of the railroad I know of in this whole massive railroad that has good documentation of any sort, and it is good too. So kudos to whoever did that work.
Yeah.
That's
Hey guys, I
gotta
gotta
go.
run. I'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I have to go. I'm meeting some of my old Southern Pacific colleagues in Concord today, so I haven't seen
Oh,
them.
nice.
So yeah.
All right.
All right. Take
Have
care.
a great
everybody.
time.
Talk to you later. I think I'll probably call it for everyone. Is everybody ready to call it then?
Yep, we're good.
Cool. We'll see you all in a couple of weeks.
Okay, take care, Phil.
Thanks.
Take care,
Bye now.
everybody.